Now I want to turn this over to Commissioner Riley.
Good afternoon. It continues to be vital that we get as many students back in person as possible before the end of the school year. This morning, I made the board aware that I will be asking them to vote to amend student learning time regulations to give me the authority to determine when the hybrid and remote models no longer count for learning hours. If I am granted this authority, I would take a phased-in approach to returning students to the classroom, working closely with state health officials and medical experts. My focus would be on bringing back elementary students first, with the plan likely extending to middle school grades later in the school year and possibly high schools as well. Ideally, my initial goal is to bring all elementary school students back to in-person learning 5 days a week in April. Parents will still have the option for their children to learn remotely through the end of the school year if they so choose. And there will be a waiver process for districts who may need to take a more incremental approach. For example, to first move to a hybrid model if they are currently fully remote. Starting with elementary students is common sense, as there is widespread agreement in the medical community that younger students are less likely to contract the virus and to transmit it. Elementary students are also easier to cohort. And from an educational perspective, these are some of the students that are struggling the most developmentally and with remote learning. It's very hard, for example, for a first grader to learn how to read remotely. Since June, we have developed hundreds of pages of detailed health and safety guidance for school districts to help mitigate the spread of the virus in our school communities. We know that the core mitigation strategies of mask wearing, hand washing, social distancing, and grouping students into cohorts all work to reduce spread within our schools. These health protocols remain the most important strategies to keep our students and teachers safe. With our partners at DPH and HHS, we launched one of the most ambitious statewide pool testing programs in the nation. There are now hundreds of schools taking part in weekly pool testing of their students, teachers, and staff. This impacts more than 280,000 students from across the state and thousands of teachers and staff. Working with the medical community, Massachusetts schools have done an incredible job of keeping our students and staff safe during this pandemic. The superintendents and their school staff have done amazing work implementing the mitigation strategies and the pool testing, and I cannot shout them out enough. We are now asking them to go one step further to begin the process of getting more of our kids back to school this spring. I would personally like to thank all of the educators for their continued partnership and willingness to take on all the challenges we have faced this year. Thank you. It's now my honor to introduce Secretary Pizer.
Thank you, Commissioner, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and good afternoon, everyone. Commissioner Riley's plan for regulatory revisions related to the use of alternative educational models is another important step in getting as many of our children back into their schools as soon as possible. Although, as you've heard, about 80% of our school districts in the Commonwealth are providing most of their students with in-person instruction on either a full or a part-time basis, close to 20% of our districts are operating fully remote. And many of these districts are among our state's largest. At the same time, there's an ever-growing body of evidence and firsthand experience here in Massachusetts, around the country, and around the world that schools are safe places for children and adults when standard health and safety protocols are followed. Even in communities with higher levels of COVID, there is little or no evidence of in-school transmission, with various studies indicating that infection rates among students who are in school are actually lower than among those students who are learning from home. To address the direct and indirect costs of COVID and to enable the reopening of schools, the federal government allocated almost $200 million directly to school districts last year as part of the CARES Act, and the governor earmarked another $200 million in federal aid just last summer. Another $734 million is on the way as part of the December stimulus bill, and the pending stimulus bill now before Congress promises to send hundreds of millions more in educational aid. In addition, DESE has purchased and distributed thousands of portable ventilation and air purification units. And last month, the governor introduced his House One budget for FY22 that fully funds the first year of the Student Opportunity Act adding almost $250 million in state funding for our public schools. At the same time, as you've heard, the administration is rolling out the first in the nation statewide weekly testing programs for students and staff to offer even more support for in-school instruction. And the governor has prioritized individuals working in early education and K-12 schools for the vaccine in phase 2 of the distribution plan. All of this against the backdrop of declining COVID and hospitalizations. But this is not just about COVID. It's also about educational progress, mental health, social emotional development, and equity. Our children, especially those in traditionally underserved communities and other high-need students, are suffering the most, creating real learning and developmental losses and exacerbating achievement and opportunity gaps. Let me be clear. Our teachers have been working under extremely difficult circumstances, and they have demonstrated remarkable flexibility and persistence, not just on behalf of their students, but on behalf of their families as well. Nevertheless, the bottom line is our children need us to step up and give them the access to the in-person education that they deserve. The time to act is now, and I congratulate the Commissioner for starting the process of bringing students back into the classrooms, and I look forward to the board's upcoming vote. Thank you very much.